Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. It started as just an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day you don't expect to remember. The sun was lowering gently in the sky, painting everything in warm golden strokes, and I had nothing on my mind except stretching my legs with a quiet walk through the garden. My grandson had been sitting inside for most of the morning, fidgeting with his phone, and I nudged him with a playful suggestion. Come with me outside. Let's walk a little. He rolled his eyes the way young people do, but he followed. That simple decision, just a walk in the garden, would end up feeling like a story I'd carry with me forever. The garden isn't grand, but it has its own kind of charm. Tall hedges, a few old fruit trees that have seen better days, and a gravel path that crunches under your shoes. The roses had already shed most of their petals, but their scent still clung faintly in the air, mixing with the earthy smell of damp soil. My grandson walked beside me, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking half bored and half thoughtful. I noticed he was taller than I remembered, and for a moment, I was startled. When had that happened? When had the little boy who used to tug on my skirt grown into this young man whose steps matched mine? At first, we didn't say much. Just the sound of gravel, the occasional chirp of a bird, and the breeze playing with the branches overhead. But silence between family can be heavy, or it can be comforting. I wasn't sure which one it was that day. I stole a glance at him, wondering what was stirring inside his head. There was a tension in his face, the kind that says words are waiting, but is not sure if they should come out. Finally, he broke it. "Grandma," he said softly, almost like he was testing the word. "Do you ever think about the past? Like, what you'd do differently?" His voice caught me by surprise. I didn't expect such a heavy question in the middle of a garden walk. I took a slow breath. All the time, I admitted, my eyes following the curve of the path. But I've learned something. If you look back too much, you stop noticing what's right in front of you. I turned to him with a smile, hoping my words would land the way I meant them to, gentle, not scolding. He looked down at the ground, kicking a loose pebble forward. "I feel like I'm already messing up. Like, I don't know where I'm going." His words were quiet, but they hit me with a force. I could hear the uncertainty, the searching, and it pulled at something deep inside me. We slowed our pace, and I touched his arm lightly, guiding him to stop near the old apple tree. Its trunk was gnarled, and one branch bent low enough for me to rest my hand against it. "You know," I said, "when I was your age, I thought I had to have everything figured out too. But life isn't about straight lines. It's more like this tree." I patted the bark. Twists, turns, branches going in all directions. Some grow strong, some break off. And yet, look, it still stands. He lifted his eyes to the tree, then back to me, and I could see the tension in his expression start to soften. "I don't know why I said that to you," he murmured, almost embarrassed. "Because you trust me," I said simply. We walked again, but slower now. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive, carrying unspoken things between us. The path curved toward the far end of the garden, where the sunlight hit differently, more golden, almost sacred. And in that light, I felt time folding, my past, his present, our connection. It wasn't just a walk, it was a quiet meeting of two souls trying to understand the rhythm of life together. By the time we reached the garden gate, the air had cooled, and the first hints of evening were settling in. My grandson glanced at me with a small smile, the kind that says thank you without words. And I realized something. This garden walk, this ordinary little moment, had become a turning point. For him, maybe, but for me as well. Because I was reminded that no matter how old we get, we're all still searching, still learning, still needing someone to walk beside us. That night, when I lay in bed, I kept thinking of his question, of the way he had looked at me, half lost, half hopeful. And I promised myself I would remember this moment, hold on to it tightly. Life gives us small windows, and if we're wise, we step through them. The walk through the garden may have been brief, but the bond it uncovered was something that would outlast even the tallest tree in that yard. It wasn't about the path or the flowers, it was about the conversation, the courage it took for him to open up, and the tenderness it awoke in me. And I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning of a story that would unfold between us, one step at a time. That evening, after our walk in the garden, The house felt unusually quiet. My grandson sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. His shoulders were hunched, and every so often, he'd glance up at me as if he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I busied myself with little things, wiping the counter, filling the kettle, setting 2 cups on the table even though I didn't really need to. Sometimes, silence is a door waiting to be opened. Finally, I broke it. "You're awfully quiet," I said, lowering myself into the chair across from him. The wooden chair creaked softly under my weight. "Still thinking about what we talked about in the garden?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes at first. Then, after a moment, he lifted his gaze. "It's just, everyone always tells me what I should be. Teachers, parents, even friends. And I don't know if I want any of it. I feel like I'm walking on a road that doesn't belong to me." His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed a flicker of fear, the kind that comes from standing on the edge of something unknown. I let the kettle hum behind me, the sound filling the space while I thought about how to respond. "You know," I began slowly, "there's a difference between advice and destiny. People will always try to shape you with their words, but at the end of the day, you're the one who decides which voice becomes your own." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "But what if I make the wrong choice? What if I fail?" The kettle whistled, sharp and insistent. I rose, poured the hot water over the tea leaves, and watched the steam rise between us like a gentle veil. "Failure isn't the enemy," I said, setting the cups down. "It's a teacher. And sometimes, the only way to learn what you truly want is to stumble through what you don't." He wrapped his hands around the warm cup, as if drawing comfort from it. The light from the overhead lamp fell across his face, softening his features, making him look younger and older all at once. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who once asked me why the stars followed us when we drove at night. But now, sitting across from me, he wasn't just that child anymore. He was standing at the threshold of adulthood, caught between who he had been and who he was becoming. "I wish I could see the future," he admitted with a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "So do I replied, smiling gently. "But maybe not knowing is what makes it worth walking toward. If you already knew the ending, would you still enjoy the story?" He looked at me for a long moment, then chuckled, shaking his head again. "You always know how to make things sound better than they are." "No," I corrected him softly. "I just know how to remind you that you're stronger than you think." We sat in comfortable silence, sipping our tea, the warmth seeping into our hands, into our conversation, into the fragile thread that connected us. The world outside the window had grown dark, the garden now only a shadowed outline under the night sky. But the memory of the afternoon's sunlight lingered in my chest, glowing like a small flame. Before going to bed, he stood by the doorway and said quietly, "Thanks, Grandma, for listening." I didn't answer right away. I just reached out, touched his arm, and let the moment linger. Words weren't always needed. Sometimes, presence was enough. Later that night, lying in my room, I thought about how rare it is for someone so young to show such vulnerability. And I thought about how easily we, as adults, forget what it feels like to stand at the beginning of everything, unsure of which direction to go. In his uncertainty, I saw my own younger self, fumbling, questioning, searching, and as I drifted into sleep, I realized something important. Our garden walk hadn't just been about his journey. It was about mine, too. The connection we shared wasn't one-sided. It was a mirror, showing me the pieces of myself I had forgotten, the dreams I had once held, and the courage it still takes, even now, to keep moving forward. That night, I made a silent promise. No matter how many questions he asked, no matter how lost he felt, I would walk beside him as long as I could. Because sometimes, all we really need in life is someone willing to share the path. The next morning, the house was alive with sound again, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old wall clock, and the faint rustle of leaves through the open kitchen window. But there was something else in the air too, a quiet heaviness that hadn't been there before. My grandson sat at the table again, this time with his head bent low over a notebook. His pen tapped against the page, then stopped, then started again. I poured myself a cup of coffee, watching him in silence for a while before I spoke. "What are you working on?" I asked gently, taking a seat across from him. He looked up, hesitant. "I'm writing a letter, I guess." Not to anyone in particular. Just to myself. He shrugged, embarrassed by his own honesty. It sounds silly. It doesn't sound silly at all, I said softly. Sometimes the words we can't say out loud are the ones we need to write down. He closed the notebook, but not before I noticed the lines scrawled across the page. What if I never figure it out? What if I'm not enough? Those words sat in my chest like a stone. I wanted to take them from him, to carry them for him the way I carried bags of groceries, but I knew I couldn't. He had to walk through them himself. Do you want to read it to me? I asked carefully. He shook his head. Not yet. Then, after a pause, he added, but maybe someday. We decided to go back into the garden, though the day was different from the one before. Clouds hung low, dimming the light, and the air carried the smell of rain. As we stepped onto the path, the gravel was darker, damp from a drizzle that had passed earlier. The roses, heavy with water, bowed slightly as if listening to us. We walked slowly, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. But as we reached the apple tree, he stopped and turned to me with an intensity one wasn't prepared for. "Grandma," he said, his voice steady but his eyes uncertain. "Do you ever feel like nobody really sees you? Like you're just there, but not really known?" His question pierced deeper than he realized. I swallowed hard before answering. "Yes," I admitted, my voice low. "More times than I can count." He frowned. "But how? You've lived so much longer, done so much more. How could you feel that way?" I leaned against the old tree, my hand pressing into its rough bark. "Because no matter how old you get, there are always parts of you that stay hidden. Sometimes because you're afraid to show them. Sometimes because no one asks." I looked at him, really looked at him. "But you just asked. And that means more than you know." The wind stirred, shaking loose a few droplets from the branches above us. They fell lightly onto our shoulders, cool against our skin. He exhaled, his breath almost a sigh. "I don't want to feel invisible. But most of the time, I do." I reached out and rested my hand on his. "You're not invisible to me. Not now, not ever." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The garden felt like it had closed itself around us, holding our words, keeping them safe. It wasn't just about advice anymore, or answers. It was about standing together in the truth of our fears and not turning away. Eventually, we continued walking, our hands brushing occasionally as if the world itself wanted to remind us that we weren't alone. The clouds broke slightly, and a thin ray of sunlight spilled onto the path, lighting our way back to the house. That evening, after dinner, he surprised me. He handed me the notebook, the one he had been writing in that morning. "Don't read it now," he said. "But maybe later. When I'm not around." I took it carefully, like it was something fragile. "I'll keep it safe," I promised, and as he disappeared into his room, I held the notebook against my chest and felt an ache deep inside me. Because I realized this was more than just a conversation, more than just a walk. It was the start of trust, delicate, precious, and easily broken. I sat by the window that night, the garden stretching into shadow outside, and thought about the strange way life works. Sometimes, the people we think we're guiding are the very ones teaching us how to be braver, more honest, more alive. The path we walked together that day wasn't long, but it left an imprint on me that I knew would last. And I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring, what questions he might ask, and what truths I might have to face in myself. Because in the end, walking in the garden wasn't just about flowers and trees, it was about finding each other, piece by piece, in the silence between words. The last day of his visit began quietly, almost too quietly, as if the walls themselves knew change was coming. I woke up early, the kind of early when the world is still half asleep, and wandered into the kitchen. The morning light crept through the curtains, spilling across the table where his notebook still lay. I hadn't opened it yet, even though every part of me wanted to. But I knew I needed to wait, to honor the trust he'd placed in me. When he finally came downstairs, his backpack slung over one shoulder, I felt a pang in my chest. It wasn't just that he'd be leaving, it was the weight of everything unspoken between us. "One more walk?" I asked, my voice soft. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. One more." The garden greeted us differently that morning. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and fresh grass. The sky was still heavy with clouds, but here and there, patches of blue pushed through. The roses, though battered by rain, seemed to hold their heads a little higher. It felt as though the garden itself wanted to give us a farewell. We walked side by side without speaking for a while, listening to the crunch of gravel underfoot. When we reached the apple tree, the place where so much had already been shared, he stopped and looked at me. His eyes were steady now, not uncertain the way they had been before. "Grandma," he said, his voice firmer than I'd heard it all week, "I don't know what's going to happen with me. I don't know where I'll end up. But I don't feel as lost anymore. Not like I did." My throat tightened. "Why not?" "Because," he said, pausing to kick at the roots of the tree, "I know I'm not walking alone. Even if you're not always right here beside me, I'll remember this. The way you listened. The way you didn't judge." He shrugged, but there was a raw honesty in his words. "It makes me think maybe I can figure it out after all." I placed my hand on his shoulder, steadying myself as much as him. "You can. And when you stumble, and you will, just remember, stumbling doesn't mean you're lost. It just means you're still moving." The breeze picked up, carrying the faint sound of a bird calling somewhere beyond the hedges. He smiled then, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. It was small, but it carried the weight of everything we had shared. We lingered there, under the tree, neither of us in a hurry to leave. And in that stillness, I realized that what we had found in the garden wasn't just conversation or comfort. It was connection. The kind that doesn't fade with distance or time. The kind that stays rooted, like the tree itself, through storms and seasons. As we walked back toward the house, his backpack bouncing lightly against his side, I felt the moment settling into memory. Not the kind that drifts away, but the kind that carves itself into your heart. Later, after he left, I finally opened the notebook. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, reading his messy handwriting. The words were raw, filled with doubt and fear, but threaded through them was something else: hope. At the very end, he had written, "I don't know where I'm going, but I'm grateful I don't have to figure it out alone. Grandma makes me believe I can try." I closed the notebook, pressing it against my chest as tears welled in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude for the garden, for the questions, for the chance to be part of his journey. And as I looked out the window, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the garden in a brilliance I hadn't seen in days. The path, the roses, the old apple tree, they were the same, but they looked different now, almost sacred, because I knew, without a doubt, that those walks weren't just walks. They were reminders that life is less about finding the right answers and more about walking the path together, step by step, heart to heart. And I whispered into the stillness of the room, as if he could hear me, "You're never invisible to me. Not now, not ever."